Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today, and today I wanted to do another rework prediction video, this time talking about everyone's favorite half-dragon, Shyvana. Now, Shyvana has been forever the bridesmaid, never the bride when it comes to the VGU polls. She has persistently placed second, beaten out by other candidates, and it's to the point where Riot basically said, we know Shyvana keeps getting close but never winning, and we're sort of talking internally about whether or not we'll actually be able to do something for her in the short term. So that's a nice sentiment, but it does also mean that there's going to be a decent amount of time for us to discuss Shyvana in advance before she actually comes up for a VGU. Of course, Skarner is happening, and actually recently Riot Lexical over on her Twitter mentioned that Shyvana is not going to be in the short run. They basically said that because she's a form swapper, they want to look for a easier win character to do first. My words, not hers, and as a result, Shyvana is likely not even going to be the next VGU to follow Skarner. So for those of you who are Shyvana fans, like myself, we are back in the waiting pool, but suffice it to say, that means we have plenty of time to talk about Shyvana, which is important because I think there are a lot of things that she's doing that I think could be so much better, and there are a lot of things she's doing that are not so great. Let's start with the cons. Shyvana's kit is, as it stands, is very uninteractive. The entire kit is based around auto-attacking, and her non-auto attack damage is very difficult to fail with, the single exception of this being her E. Obviously, Twin Bite is an auto-attack reset. W does ambient AoE magic damage, which is a classic design you see from like designs Riot made back in Season 2 for their tanky frontline characters, where basically they press a button and they just do ambient damage to nearby characters. It's terrible design. I absolutely hate it, and I hate it on Shyvana's kit as well. And her E is sort of the one place in her kit where there is counterplay available. And this is sort of most notable if you ever have attempted to play or played in the past top lane Shyvana, where you can really see this at work. If Shyvana hits you with an E, you immediately leave, because you can no longer outplay any of her damage. She's going to run at you with her W active, you'll take the ambient AoE magic damage, she'll auto-attack you for damage, she'll get the bonus on hit damage from the E mark, and there's nothing you can do about that, right? If she has better stats than you at that point, you just have to leave because you can't beat her from there. Conversely, if Shyvana misses her E, she has to leave, because she can no longer outplay you, right? The entirety of her kit is just walk at you, auto-attack, and stand next to you with ambient AoE magic damage going on, without the benefit of the bonus on hit damage. She's missing the damage from her E as well, and as a result, she just has to back away because she's down a ton of damage, and she no longer can just sort of stat stick you out of the game. This is a major problem with Shyvana's kit because it makes her feel extremely binary. If she gets ahead, she's sort of in the hand of God because she just has more stats than you can possibly deal with, but if she's behind, she doesn't really have any way back in because she doesn't have the ability to outplay or to make the big plays happen because her kit just doesn't give her the ability to do that. Speaking of a stat stick, Shyvana's passive, while extremely fluffy, is very inconsistent. You can get 3 Drakes extremely quickly and have a ton of bonus resist for free and just be tanky without having to build tanky, or you get 0 Drakes early and you more or less don't have a passive. It's also one of those things that's extremely difficult for Riot to balance with regards to Shyvana top versus Shyvana jungle. If you're Shyvana jungle and you're jungling and you have easy access to a dragon, you're going to be able to benefit from that 10% increased damage to dragons. If you're top lane, you again may as well not have a passive because you're not actually participating in any of the dragon plays. This is even more notable, where back in the day Riot justified this by saying if you're Shyvana top you can maybe teleport down to assist your team with a dragon, but nowadays with the way teleport works, that's not really in the cards anymore, at least for the earliest dragons in the game, and as a result, top lane Shyvana does not exist. She is pigeonholed entirely into the jungle on the basis of this passive, so again, while it's a very fluffy ability, I'm not a big fan of the actual gameplay that it gives her. Finally, I think that Shyvana's lack of a non-ultimate gap closer makes her very difficult to pilot in the early game. She feels all but forced to farm because there's no real way for her to do anything to influence the map outside of run to camp, run to the next camp. This does give her some ability to do the counter jungling thing, but again, as I've mentioned before with Riot's design philosophy shifts, with the new jungle being very punishing towards counter jungling, Shyvana again feels like she doesn't have a place in the game. Heck, even Master Yi ganks better than Shyvana does, because he at least has a targeted gap closer to get in range to apply red buff. The literal only thing Shyvana can do is press W and hope and pray that you don't have any crowd control that you can land on her to prevent her from getting all the way in. And as a result, she's just forced to farm up for the first few levels of the game, which feels really bad, especially if you're Shyvana who's trying to help her team, but just kind of can't do that because you literally don't have the ability to actually gank. That said, there are some things that I think Shyvana does really well. I think her ultimate is extremely satisfying to use, not only the knockback, but also the power that comes from transforming into a dragon. The entirety of Dragon Descent is honestly just amazing. I love the ability for you to actually get into a fight with it. I like the fact that there's a crowd control component of it that lets you potentially knock enemies around or through walls. I like the transformation afterwards. There's a lot that's really, really cool about that ability in particular. I think her Fury passive has some interesting implications for her gameplay. I don't think necessarily it's the best design ever, but I like that there is a reason for her to have Fury, and I like that her ultimate doesn't have a cooldown. It's based entirely on Fury. This means that if Shyvana's farming a bunch, her ult will actually have a lower cooldown than it does normally, versus if she ults and then dies again, then maybe she's waiting a lot longer to actually get her ultimate back, and staying in combat then can keep her ulting for longer, but again, it's something that every champion can see. There's some gameplay here that I don't necessarily hate. I don't know that I love it, but I do at least think that Shyvana can make an argument for remaining a Fury champion in the future. Shyvana also has a variety of playstyles. She can be built Bruiser, she can be built Pure Tank, she can be built On Hit, and of course there's the dreaded AP Shyvana build, which I'm not a big fan of. I've actually made an entire video about why I hate AP Shyvana, but it is an option, and that does mean that Shyvana is a very flexible champion. When she shows up in game, you kind of don't know what she's building until you've seen the first couple of items or potentially her Keystone Choice, and at that point you can sort of adjust accordingly, but that degree of flexibility is very cool in a champion. But so let's talk about fixes then. Riot want to make her human form better differentiated from her dragon form, and they want to make her dragon form more formidable and destructive. Their words, not mine. They classify her as a champion who doesn't live up to her thematic potential, and this is something I absolutely agree with. Shyvana does not feel like a scary half-dragon warrior who can turn into a full dragon and rip you to shreds. She's just this sort of awkward lady running around throwing fireballs at you, and eventually will turn into a dragon and maybe keep running away from you and throwing fireballs at you. Yes, I hate AP Shyvana. This is going to be a theme in this video. I absolutely think that Shyvana needs a new passive. Her old one is just a stat stick with a stupid hoop to jump through, and I therefore don't think it's worth keeping around almost at all. If you wanted to keep the 10% bone increased damage to dragons, I could maybe see an argument for that. It does at least mean that she has a thematic passive that I don't think adds that much power to her overall, but I definitely think that the stat stick of killing dragons to get tankier, that should absolutely go away. Regardless of how fluffy it is, I just don't like that ability at all. I also think that Shyvana's W is quite boring. There are some things about it that I like, but in general, I think that it just doesn't really do what I want. I like the fact that it extends duration while she's staying in the middle of a fight, but I don't like, again, the ambient AoE magic damage, and the bonus movement speed is all but imperceptible. Her Q is extremely boring and could easily be improved. I know it's an auto-attack reset. Again, there are some things that I like. The fact that it strikes twice, meaning that you can auto-award and then Q reset to kill it immediately. That's kind of neat, but not necessarily something that's worth trying to keep. And I think her R could use some tweaks as well. But let's go ahead and just talk through her kit initially. I actually want to start with the W, because I think that there are two things that Riot could do to this, and I think that depending on how they take her dragon form, you could go either way. First, I think that Riot could improve the immediate satisfaction of W by granting her significantly more movement speed on activation that decays over the duration. That way, Shyvana has a burst of movement speed to potentially close the gap and sucker punch a champion not expecting it, but then it fades away over time, meaning that she's still a kiteable champion at the end of the day. You can also make this a short-range telegraphed dash, like Urgot's E, which allows Shyvana to close short distances if she's able to time it right. I think this would be a fun ability and potentially refreshing her gameplay in a good way. I also think this plays into the thematic resonance from her Legends of Runeterra incarnation, where she's literally flying through the sky in her human form during her level-up animation, so that kind of thing wouldn't necessarily feel like it's coming out of completely out of nowhere. As a result of this, you might notice Shyvana's losing some of the damage from her W. I do think that it would make sense for the W to damage enemies that she dashes through if that's the direction Riot take. I think that if it gives her significantly increased movement speed on activation, you can maybe throw some other power into the ability, but primarily I think that the W damage from standing near her could be moved to her passive instead. I would love to see a passive where Shyvana auto-attacks, with Shyvana's auto-attacks grant her a stackable attack speed bonus, where at maximum stacks she becomes shrouded in flames that gives her old W aura for as long as she remains in combat. This then rewards Shyvana with play patterns that focus on sustained damage. If she's able to get into a fight and get stacking, she's not only doing a bunch of damage with her auto attacks, but she's doing a bunch of damage from just being near you, but it's also less of a button press, right? You can get it, but you have to remain in combat for a significant period of time, and that I think is a more interesting gameplay loop than what we currently have. If you take this route, then you could potentially say W grants her stacks, or maybe W grants her attack speed on activation. If you take the movement speed route, of course, if she has a dash, then it can just deal damage to enemies that it passes through. I think that's totally fine. But I think these would be go a long way towards addressing some of the issues that I have with Shyvana's kit, just feeling like there isn't enough for her to do. I think Shyvana's Q could use some changes as well. You could go very boring with this and just make it a damage all enemies in a cone in front of her, applying on hits, maybe applying on hits twice, which would then have synergy with the new passive that I just talked about. There are some things that I think you could do potentially with the Q to give it a little bit more spice, but I think you could even open this ability up for something else that's even more failable, just to give Shyvana something else to either outplay you with or to fail with, maybe even something like a Xinjiao W. Obviously, you'd have to maybe tweak it around a little bit, but just something that your opponent can react to and respond to, and then maybe gives Shyvana a little bit more depth in terms of how you can play her. Shyvana's E, I think, is totally fine. I literally think there are no changes needed to that ability at all, especially the Dragon form. I don't care what else Riot does with her Dragon form, but her Dragon E absolutely should stay. Obviously, that's the bread and butter of her AP Shyvana build, and I'm not happy with that, but I think that with the other nerfs in the kit that I sort of have lined up for AP Shyvana, that's probably totally fine, and the build will likely fall off entirely. I don't think it's a compelling enough build to keep in Shyvana's new kit. I absolutely think it's something that if it's maintainable, sure, but if it has to be sacrificed for a better playstyle, I think absolutely throw it away into the garbage because it's that bad. Again, check out my video if you want to see more details on that. Shyvana's ultimate is really where the majority of the rework is going to have to come into play. I love the active, but I'm curious if Riot are willing to break their transforming champion rule for Shyvana. For those of you who are unaware, Riot tend to, when they have a transforming champion, they have a quote-unquote rule about it. It's not a hard and fast rule, but they have a rule about it. The rule is that you don't change the abilities on a temporary transformation. This means that if your name is Shyvana, or if your name is Riven, or if your name is Cassante, and you have a transformation in your kit, your abilities don't fundamentally change what they do. If I'm Riven, or if I'm Shyvana, or if I'm Cassante, and I press my Q, whether I'm transformed or not, it does mostly the same thing that it did before. And the idea is that, because it's temporary, I don't want to have to transform and then have to relearn what my champion does on the fly. I ideally want to transform and be able to keep playing my champion in the exact same way that I was before, just with more power and maybe one or two extra mechanics to worry about. Conversely, if your champion's transformation is permanent, think Jace or Nidalee or Elise, then you can have different abilities because you can stay in that form forever. Elise can turn into a spider and literally play an entire game as a spider if she wants to, and her abilities will stay the same throughout, and so she can learn how to use those abilities depending on what form she's actually in. If Riot are... That said, Gnar has a temporary transformation that completely changes his abilities, so I'm curious if that rule is still a rule. If Riot are willing to give Shyvana a brand new kit while she's a dragon, I suggest something similar to Mega Gnar, which is relatively low mobility but extremely high damage and durability. Then Shyvana's human form is more of a light skirmisher. She can dash into fights, she can do a bunch of damage, but then when she turns into a dragon, she's trading away her mobility in exchange for significantly higher durability. If they do take this, I would love for them to stray away from crowd control in her dragon form in order to let her rip and tear as only a dragon can, basically making her a big juggernaut, low mobility but high damage and high durability, but no crowd control so as to differentiate her from Mega Gnar. I don't have concrete ideas for this, besides the E staying the same, but riffs on the above abilities that I've talked about are probably ideal. I think AoE damage is going to be the key here. Conversely, if Riot do say that Shyvana's abilities need to stay mostly the same, I think you can still work with the abilities that I talked about before. With the Q, you could give her a bigger cone on whatever claw ability you end up giving her. With her W, you can maybe keep the dash but decrease the distance, or you could change it from a dash to a movement speed steroid, sort of like it is on live, in order to, again, differentiate Shyvana's dragon form from her human form, but try to play up the destructiveness and the AoE-ness of the Shyvana's dragon kit. But those are my ideas, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below, what ideas you have for potentially reworking Shyvana, what you like about her current kit, what you hate about her current kit. Any of you AP Shyvana enjoyers, I actually would love to hear your guys' thoughts and why you like AP Shyvana, so leave that all down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.